Have you? Hope you all come tonight. Preaching should be okay. The ice cream will be great. So that's good. That's good. I was saying a bit before church this morning, before Sunday school, and a little bit in the class that in my door knocking, I have a JW that just lives 4 doors up from us. And that would be Jehovah's Witness. That's one of the modern time cults that we have. But I got to talk with him a bit, and he doesn't. He grew up Catholic in Chicago, and then I guess came down here or started going to a Kingdom Hall there, and it's really pretty sad because the Jesus that we just sang about, they just don't acknowledge him as God, and they use a lot of sleight of hand to kind of try to pull that off, I guess. But I had a lot of good visits. I did 30 doors yesterday, and the other guys went out in twos, and they had some good visits. They were telling me, and God will bless if we're just faithful. So if you would like to be part of that, you just need to show up a little before 10 on Saturdays in the morning, and we'll get you paired up with somebody who knows what they're doing, and off you get to go. It's always fun. So try to do that if you can. It'll be an amazing experience. And until you do it, you hear and have a lot of fear and trepidation, but it's really not as bad as you think. Most everybody I talked to was nice. And even the dogs that I passed that were barking and going crazy. You walk by a fence, it's one of those 4-foot high fences, and you have a couple of the larger dogs standing on them and their heads looking right at you. It's like, what's the matter with you guys? It's okay. I'm just telling people about Jesus. It's good. And, so that's always good. Now, Wednesday night, the thought kind of came into my head and I couldn't get it out. And I made some comments, short comments, brief comments. So I felt that I needed to elaborate on that. And I'm always good with that when the Holy Spirit kind of says, yeah, that's good. Here's what you do. That's always good for a preacher to follow that. So I'm going to preach to you today, kind of starting in the Gospel of John, chapter 1 and verse 6. But there was a man sent from God. And if you were here Wednesday night or watched the live stream Wednesday night, you already have a little clue as to what I'm going to be saying here in a sense. But it says in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 6, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. And so God sent a man, and my name happens to be the same as his, John, which is good, but that has really nothing to do with it. The important part of it is a man sent from God is the man God blesses. If God sends you to do something, God will bless you as you do it. And I did a lot of research, and that might be something I didn't stick in my Bible, and it might not, but I know it, so I didn't stick it in here. But I have my outline. Don't worry, no, never fear. There have been some great churches in the United States over the years. Great churches. And I did some looking at one that's really near and dear to my heart, and that would have been Highland Park Baptist Church, Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I didn't realize, but at one time, Dr. Lee Robertson in Highland Park claimed, and this is going to be crazy, 57,000 members. 57,000. Now, I think they counted all the preaching stations and churches that they had young men who were there to get preaching, degrees in preaching, and they sent them out, and I was one of them. I went to Ooltewah, Tennessee, to Faith Baptist Church, and I preached there. But 57,000. Now, that's pretty great, isn't it? Souls were saved. They had a weekly visitation, door-knocking ministry. They fed everybody before they went out. Then you went out and visited for an hour, hour and a half. Then you came back and gave reports. It was cool. That church in that facility has ceased to exist. It is now up on the property that they had Camp Joy, which was a camp for kids that Dr. Robertson founded after his daughter Joy died at a very young age. And they have about 300 to 400 people coming. Now that doesn't sound all that great, does it? Sounds kind of bad. Akron Baptist Temple in Akron, Ohio, Dallas Billington started. His son Charles pastored after him. Dallas Billington being, he was from Kentucky, a really good preacher, built a lot of buildings and did all kinds of things. But Akron Baptist Temple is non-existent. They vacated the property and just left it. Now you say, well, okay, how big was it? 5,000 to 7,000 people on a Sunday. And they stopped existing. Canton Baptist Temple, same thing with Harold Henninger. They would run 3,000, 3,500 on a Sunday. They're down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 today. First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas, one of the preachers that I like to read about, George W. Truett and then W.A. Criswell. Those two men pastored that church for a total of 90 years between them. That's almost unheard of. That at one time was a church of over 25,000 members. Today, even though they've got a good pastor, and many of you have seen him on TV and you listen to him on the radio, Brother Jeffers, he's good, conservative guy, it's gone way down. So you might say, why are you giving us this background? I want you to kind of understand, and not because it's me, but because I think it's a truth that churches who are going to watch us streaming it need to hear. When you have God's man who is doing God's will and preaching God's word, you need to kind of help him out and do your part of what God called you to. Like Trish and I came to a handful of folks, and God has been blessing, and we're growing. We didn't have a piano player. Then God sends who he wants. God fills in what he wants if you're faithful, but you have to be about God's work. You have to be about God being the one that we lift up. So the man from God that God blesses, that in this case, in this scripture, is John. He was the forerunner of Christ. He had a task and a purpose. And in Matthew 3 and verse 1, so I want to get to the scriptures as fast as I can because I hope it'll keep me out of trouble. And please do not think, is he trying to build himself up? That's not the goal. If it was, that would be a very poor goal for a message. That is not the goal. It's to help us as a church see kind of how God works and how God moves in things and situations. So in Matthew 3 and verse 1, in those days came John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness of Judea. And his message was pretty simple. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Pretty simple message, but still God's message. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so John was mightily used of God to get this message out. In Matthew 11 and verse 11, Jesus said, and I'm going to put a pun in here in a second, so kind of be listening, okay? Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Now, he said none greater than, he didn't say John. He said John the Baptist. And I kind of like that. And I say, and this is the pun, he didn't say John the Methodist. He didn't say John the Lutheran or Episcopal or Presbyterian or anything. It was John the Baptist. And Jesus said that. Now, I know all of you who are up on the Bible, you're saying, yeah, but it's kind of like you meant John the Baptizer. I know that, but it's just fun for me to kind of point that out, that Baptist, that's Jesus said about it. So, we kind of have to see. John was a man of commitment and dedication, and he truly loved God, and God used him as he served God. Now, over the years, and even at that time, the old adage and the old pun kind of, John was such a fervent preacher that one day he preached his head off. And, we say, what? Well, he pointed out that you got your brother Philip's wife, that's wrong. And when they were in the audience, and so as he pointed that out, the wife of never forgot. And when she had opportunity, she had her daughter ask for John the Baptist's head on a charger. So he lost his head for preaching the truth. He preached the word, it cost him his life. But so she opposed him. And in Numbers, I want you to look at something dealing with Moses. Numbers 16, 28 through 34. And please don't click out or check out till I'm done, till you hear the whole rather than the part of the message today. And here in Numbers 16, starting at verse 28. And Moses said, hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. Or when it says that there in the King James, when it says that they go down quick, that means alive. When they go down alive or go down living, Moses said that the ground will open up and swallow them up, because Korah and some other men got together and they said, Moses, we don't like the way you're doing things. And we think you're just not the good leader that we hoped you would be. And so out you got to go. And I'm not saying that there aren't times that a pastor is doing wrong and not preaching truth, that he needs to out you got to go. That's absolutely the case. That has happened. And I know some places where it really should happen, but that's just my humble opinion. But I know the situation and the circumstance pretty well, and they need, but the people won't, and so I can't tell them they should. But sometimes that needs to happen. So then we go on here as far as verse 31 in Numbers 16. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder, opened up, that was under them, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. So there is a point where you've got to be careful to come against, as they did Moses, and we can look back and say, man, Moses was a great leader. He was amazing. God used him greatly. It was just, and so we have that luxury that we can look back on that. But one of the things that we need to understand and know, in actuality, Moses was the one God chose to lead. And if Moses was doing wrong, then it would have been God's responsibility to get Moses. But these people didn't like what he was doing. They didn't like maybe where they were going. They didn't like that their clothes lasted 40 years. Who knows? They didn't like the piano being on the right side of the platform, or they didn't like the color of the choir robes, or they didn't like the color that was picked for carpet, and who said that. I mean, who knows? And you all kind of understand what I'm saying. And there, while I was in Chattanooga and a member at Highland Park with Dr. Robertson as the pastor, there were 396 Baptist churches in the city limits of Chattanooga, Tennessee. 396. That's a lot of Baptist churches. And seriously, if you went down Brainerd or up McCauley, you would go by Grace Baptist Church, and you would go by New Grace Baptist Church, and then you would go by Greater New Grace Baptist Church. I mean, splits. Well, we split. We didn't like this. We didn't like this. We didn't like this. And splits. I mean, People have got to understand a church is in God's economy, run by, or not run by, led by who God picks to lead it, as long as they are scriptural in what they're doing. And that's hard for people to think about and understand, but that's what God intended. Because if he didn't, then today we do what this one wants and that one wants and this, and we're just all over the place. But we've got to kind of have a focus and a direction. And we got to come together to support the person who's leading in that regard. And unfortunately, in this case, it's me, but to others listening, and I say unfortunately, because that's a lot of responsibility. And some have noticed I do my best to not micromanage. If you take a job, you got the job. I don't check on Scott, what he's teaching in Sunday school over there. I don't ask him to submit in writing what he's going to be speaking on the Sunday nights that he gets to preach. I don't tell Philip, okay, I got to give you the okay on everything you do with the building and grounds. I don't tell the guys in the media, the audio, video, hey, here's what you got to do because I said, and I never tell Keith, here's the songs you got to pick. Do I? Not at all. Because I don't get involved in those. I let the people who God has given us that are talented do the things God gifted them to do. It's pretty easy for me. Some guys don't find it so easy, but I find it pretty easy. I mean, hey. And so when you come to me and say, hey, what about? And I say, well, I don't know. Ask Carrie. Or what about, well, that would be Philip you need to talk to, or talk to Lou. I don't know. And a lot of people say, well, you're the pastor. You don't know much. I kind of know what I feel I need to know to be a pastor. But let me take you another place here in Numbers 26, verses 9, 10, and 11. And here it just lists some of the people. So they were important enough for God to use them as an example on down the road a little bit. Numbers 26, verse 9. The sons of Eliab, Nemuel, Dathan, Abiram. This is that Dathan and Abiram, which were famous in the congregation, who strove against Moses and against Aaron in the company of Korah, when they strove against the Lord. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah. When that company died, what time the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign, notwithstanding the children of Korah died also. So it was a great price to pay for not at least acknowledging God's order of things. And so they didn't, and they paid the price. There was a man sent from God. And I think, as the churches I mentioned to you, First Baptist Jacksonville, where a really good close friend of mine, Steve Foster, who's an evangelist from East Texas, but he lives in the Atlanta, Georgia area now. He and I met there in '98 at a pastor's conference. A church that owned or owns 9.5 blocks of downtown Jacksonville, Florida. A church that at one time their youth group was broken up by zip codes. Imagine a church that large. Seriously, they didn't just have a senior high, junior high. They had a senior high, this is your zip code, senior high, and I mean multiple. It was crazy. Homer Lindsay and Jerry Vines were the pastors there. They co-pastored. And when I went there, they had not too long before that built a 9,200 seat auditorium and facility there in downtown Jacksonville. 18 point whatever million dollars. And the day they turned the key, and by that I mean the first day that they got in the building, God had blessed them that it was paid off totally. They got in a brand new building, 18 point whatever million, debt free. That church has since, because I checked with Steve, because he's over in that area, because I wanted to know, because it's like, he said, yeah, that's where we met. I said, yeah, I know, but do you know anything about it? He said, well, yeah, they're running between 400 and 600, and they're trying to sell their property off as fast as they can. Now, folks, what I want to tell you, and the reason I'm pointing it out, God uses a man. Now, those were great men of God that were in there, and most of them I knew, or at least had the privilege of hearing or being in their churches. You've got to be very careful with the follow-up. You've got to be very careful with once you have a person who God blesses like that, because it must have been the right person with the right people at the right time, and God blessed. You've got to be very careful and not kind of just jump or bite at the very first, little whatever. You've got to make sure that you're in much prayer and you get a person who can continue that ministry, who can further that ministry. And I tried to check and didn't really get any statistics on it, but Bellevue Baptist Church, R.G. Lee's church that he pastored before Adrian Rogers went there, I was able to be there for what they called a Let the Fire Fall pastors conference, and it wasn't charismatic at all. It was just, preaching with zeal. They got 43 acres of carpet inside their church facilities. I was like, huh? They got 2 elevators that get you from the foyer when you come in to the second or third floor. I mean, 2 in a church building? I mean, I was like the country yokel, like this huge crystal chandelier, $250,000 worth right there in the foyer. And Adrian Rogers, if you've ever heard him, man, he's like the most eloquent orator of Baptist preachers. I mean, his voice, the way he words things, I mean, he was just great. Of course, he's passed. Next guy came in. It dropped off a huge amount, even though he's a nice guy, a good preacher. You just got to make sure you got God's person. And you say, why are you using all these big churches? Well, because I kind of shared Wednesday night some of my experience of growing a church to a certain point and then leaving, and the next guy or the one after him just totally bottomed it out. You've got to be careful and make sure the Lord's leading you to do whatever you're doing. Now, don't get me wrong. There was a man sent from God, and today in God's economy, the man he sends needs a good support team. He needs good people, faithful people to do different areas of ministry that'll help and to accomplish a purpose, that'll help in the ministry in general. And I definitely need you guys' help. As far as here, and any pastor who says he doesn't has just lost his mind. You have to have people, you have to have good people, and you have to let people do what they know how to do. You don't rein them in, you watch them. Unfortunately, it took me a while, and a retired Army officer, he went in at E1, but retired as a colonel, told me one day in the vestibule of this new building that we built there in Pennsylvania, John, you've got to let people fail. And you've heard me say this. I said, Dick, why would I let them fail when I can do it better? I mean, I can, no. He said, you're not understanding. You let people fail. That's how they learn. That's how they grow. And I'm like, huh? But I had enough respect for him that I thought, okay, fine. So that was probably in my, 10th, close to my 18th year of ministry. I said, all right. And I felt the weight lifted off my shoulders. Just let people do what people know how to do. And God will bless as we work together. And we need to do that. We need to work together. So many have grown large in numbers over the years only to sell their property and downsize when the pastor left or died. But a called man, Paul the Apostle, let's look in Romans 1. And if you have any questions after this, please ask me. Say, what did you mean by? What were you? I'll be happy to share with you whatever I can. Romans 1:1, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. Now, there's a big difference in somebody that's called to preach and somebody who just thinks it'd be a good thing to do. And there's a lot of them who think it'd just be a good thing to do that are in ministry, or because other people kind of, well, you need to do, and, kind of drug and pushed and prodded. But unless God calls you, it's not worth anything. And so we need to understand that. And one of the things in Texas, when I pastored there, Mama called and Daddy sent. You say, what does that mean? Well, Mama always wanted to raise a preacher boy, and Daddy had the money to pay for school. And they didn't really get God's call, so they weren't really what I would call good pastors. They may have been good speakers, but God calls a pastor to do more than just speak. It's a leadership that you have to have, kind of like in the military. Hopefully, these bad leaders don't just keep getting promoted to where they're over a lot of people and they're a bad leader. Hopefully, that doesn't happen. And hopefully, in God's economy, that doesn't happen. 60%, or even more, I forget now, but at least 60% of all the guys who started out in seminary or school of theology with me are already out of the ministry. Already out of it. Because it's tough. It gets tough. It can be tough. They just give up. Paul said in Romans 8:28, so just back a couple more pages, and many of you know it by heart, and I understand that for sure. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Called to do nursery, called to do hospitality, called to do building and grounds, called to teach a Sunday school class, called to be in the music program, called to be greeters, called to be whatever. God calls people. That's you guys. And that's anybody watching. God gave you a gift and a talent that you need to be using. One of my gifts and talents, let other people do stuff. One of the bad things, and I know of an illustration really close to me, where the church called a lifelong youth pastor to be their pastor, and he's just screwing up in my book right and left because he's treating adults like they were youth. And he's not letting adults do ministry the way they can because he wants to make sure that he has a foot in or a hand in. You can't do that. And especially not with people that I trained to do what God gifted them to do. And it's just kind of interesting, all the different flavors you get. So listen to me. I understand when you say, well, I know, and they're a good call for people to speak up. And, well, maybe. But I would think in most cases, benefit of the doubt is more appropriate than I got to speak up. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had people who have no clue and don't understand that I've already looked at something inside out, backwards, frontwards, every way I could. And they're telling, well, you need to do it. Well, I didn't ask you what I need to do. I already know what I need to do. I just need you to pray for me. I got it. Just like you got it. I think it'd be real funny because the only thing I can really say for sure, if I looked at like the hymn book and the songs, Keith, I know what a G clef is. For whatever that's worth. That's it. That's my extent of music. So why would I try to tell them how to do music? Or the guys on our computers, I'm sure whenever I ask some questions, they think, oh, preacher, bless your heart. You're so dumb. And that's okay, because I don't need to know everything, because we've got people that do. And that's how it should be. That's how it needs to be. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. John the Baptist did what God called him to do. Now, I do not think I would like to be eating locusts and wild honey. Just off the cuff, I just don't see that I would like that. The honey would probably be okay, but the locust stuff, now, and the camel hair, I don't know what that would be for. Maybe long lasting, who knows? But the things, that we wouldn't do. But it needs to be a called man, and he needs to be a burdened man. He has to have a burden for the call that God put in his life. If you don't have a burden, then you of all people are most miserable. Nahum chapter 1 and verse 1, the book of Nahum, minor prophet, right after Micah. It says the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. A vision. burdened. So he's a man that's burdened. Nahum is. And then Habakkuk 1 and verse 1. Same thing. And some of you will say Habakkuk, and I don't know where you got that, but you did, so it's okay. It's Habakkuk. The burden which